Welcome to Tzuzamen,
which is
a new episode.
Together. Tzuzamen is together, right? Togetherness, whatever. Hi, Tzili.
And hi.
Yeah, hi, Isaac. He will introduce his full name and everything, but I have to just mention that every week we come together in order to understand something new, about life in different areas. So you are now today our guest. And Tzili, can you please have the honor to introduce him?
Welcome, Isaac. Isaac Zablocki, the head of the film program at the JCC Manhattan. We're happy to have you, Isaac. And I wanted to ask you more than a question, just a guidance, because over the years, since the JCC is presenting films, there is a little bit shifting at the way the Jewish community is looking at films from Israel, and there's a more pointy and specific point of view that you at the JCC Manhattan decided to take upon. Can you just walk us through, because it will give us a little bit a view over the changes of the ideas and the view of the Israelis in the United States, the American Jews towards Israel, the American Jews towards what we call the problems in Israel. Just take us through, please.
Oh, there's a lot there, but thank you, first of all, for having me here. This is a lot of fun. So the JCC's film program, which in general I see film as a form of education. Films impact us, they engage us, and they change us. And that change is a form of education. And I think with great power comes great responsibility as well. So I hope to, first of all, personally select films that are changing people for the better. And we do that across the board, specifically with Israeli films. First of all, I grew up in Israel, even though I'm American born and my parents are American. I grew up in Israel and served in the army. And of course, have a very deep connection to Israel. And the film program, when we started putting a huge focus, and this is about 15 years ago, on Israeli films, we started with the Other Israel Film Festival, which was definitely taking an other approach. One of the things we wanted to do was to go beyond the headlines and to really show true life in Israel and bring up some of the tough questions that exist that sometimes are glossed over, that sometimes the American community knows through some headlines, but not really in depth, and give an opportunity to take a deeper look and engage with these topics, agree, disagree, mostly disagree, because that's what happens with Israel, no matter what the film's about. But also, I think, to come from really an insider perspective too. I think that's an important side and an important change that we're trying to bring, and not just show the classic Zionist American Jewish perspective of Israel, but rather to present films that really show what Israeli society is today. And of course, Israeli society and Israeli cinema today is so much more diverse and so much more nuanced.
How did the local community accept your different approach compared to what they knew before?
Well, I mean, in the long run, very, very well, because our numbers continue to keep growing.
But then, in the beginning?
At the very beginning, we had protesters outside our building. I mean, our first few years of Other Israel, there was an organization started, which I won't mention its name because it doesn't need any more attention, and it's kind of disappeared. But there were organizations started to protest the JCC's film selections and to say that only certain kinds of films should be shown at the JCC. And
so they wanted just to show the nice, perfect Israel?
First of all, there aren't any of those films, or aren't any good films like that. If you want to make a good film, you're got to make something a little bit juicy there.
And you mean to show the complexity, not just the.
You want to show complexity. You want to show something that actually gets into human beings and is not just a cliche.
But it's not only about films. I think that there's a huge change between the previous generation towards the state of Israel, and there's a very different attitude now, and I think that this is part of the whole transition. I remember when the Camera Theater, the Theater of Tel Aviv, was here in the BEM, and the BEM was gutsy enough to bring two problematic plays. One was Fleischer, that was talking about the orthodoxy, how they take over communities or territories in Israel, and one was about Gorodish, from the Yom Kippur War, about the general from the South Front. And I remember the newspapers the following day about Fleischer. Everybody were so mad. How do you dare to bring a problem to say something bad about that is going on in Israel in that way, which you understand that there's a division and disconnect, with the concept and even the knowledge, or even the accepting or the understanding. And I find it over the years that there's so many gaps between how people take Israel and how people don't know many things about Israel. And the same was in movies. And in the beginning, the people didn't want to hear about bad things and didn't want to think.
This is how we grew up.
Right?
We grew up until 1967 that everything is perfect. We believed the IDF, spokesman, it was God. I mean, there is no way they give us even a slightly wrong information. Yeah. We grew up with complete, by the way, I thought that religious people cannot do negative things, like even stealing. They were perfect. They were like, kadosh. But so this is how we grew up. We grew up like this.
But even today, the elderly, the old generation of the Jews here, especially in Florida, they don't want to hear about Arabs. They want clean Israel. They don't understand even, and they don't care.
But not only Arabs, let's say, the film that deals with a mother who is prostitute, right? Which is a wonderful film.
Yeah.
What? You are telling stories about prostitutes in Israel?
Do they have whores in Israel?
So,
they're not human there.
Right.
I mean, it's so interesting because, first of all, I will say that Other Israel as a film festival specifically drew a younger audience without trying. This is like the Jewish community always wants to bring in the next generation and has been failing completely. And a younger audience significantly shows up to the Other Israel Film Festival because they don't want to see an Israel that's perfect. They have heard that Israel is imperfect. Israel is human too. And therefore it needs to show, we try to show a picture of the reality, which is
even showed Ma'abarot, right? Even what how you call it in English?
How do you say Ma'abarot in English?
How do you say Ma'abarot? The transition camps, right?
Okay. You even made, I think you showed Dina Rickley's film. Fantastic, what was in the beginning? It was not rosy.
And it's not always painting a pretty picture. And by the way, that doesn't mean that you don't love a place because you're not painting a pretty picture.
Are you talking to us?
I mean, exactly.
We are so attached to Israel. We are like, it's like unbelievable, but I grew up to look at Israel a bit, critically, after the Six-Day War. Until then, even now it's a bit difficult for me,
But Isaac, don't you think that sometimes it feels that the shift is shifting a little bit too much to the extreme on the other side, with a lot of criticism to Israel, and it's like there's no in between. They're not even try to understand or to have a little bit mercy on us.
Oh, wait a minute. Love is not shutting your eyes. You cannot shut your eyes because you love Israel.
No, I'm not. No, God forbid, I'm not saying that.
It's gonna go.
There's something that went a little bit too much for some.
There is like, I mean, I think the BDS movement. There's a real problem with the movement that is creating polarization. But I think we don't have to turn it into a polarized situation. I don't think that we have to go to the extreme. You're with us or against us. I think you could be critical.
Absolutely,
it's a show of maturity.
Yeah.
And the change will come only if we develop tools to look at reality. It doesn't matter what reality, with open eyes and be analytical. I mean, it's impossible. So because now we even confuse. We confuse being against the policy and we call it antisemitism. I mean, it's complete becoming like a mess.
It's really is messy, and I see organizations on both sides that will not hear anything from the other side, will shut off completely to trying to actually bridge any kind of gaps. And I mean, the same thing's going on with American politics as well right now, as we can see. And it's just, and there's no middle ground anymore, and that is problematic. And I often wish that there was more.
That's what I was referring to, because there is no middle ground.
You know, I just want to clarify something. You know, I'm on and off, and I'm 6 months here, 6 months in Israel. And I must tell you, I just wonder, really, there is a JCC, there is a Jewish committee, right? And there is I mean, and I don't really know if you work together, each one is a different agenda. What's going on actually?
What is the JCC? Is that the question? So the JCC is a community.
Different from the others.
It's the JCC is a community center. We're, if anything, we're closest to, as far as an umbrella organization, to like the 92nd Street Y.
Oh, wow.
It's cultural and community, and it's not specifically political, but meant to represent everything that our community is about, and all the things that are important to our community.
But I think it's a little bit different, because the 92nd Y is an old institute that has a very big thumb, very specific thumb on it. And the JCC, it's like the Upper West Side and the Upper East Side is like two different countries. But I think that the JCC became a home for the Israeli film, for the different Israeli film, in a very strong way, that younger people, or more progressive people, or more left-wing people, and many Israelis that come from the industry to Israel feel very comfortable, specifically in the JCC. It's like a local base for something that is going on over there in the Middle East.
But because I really believe,
and by the way, not only Israelis, Arabs as well.
Right, but I know that you believe in films, and that films can bring to attitude change, because how that it's so emotionally, and you're involved. And so I was hoping that more what you call right wing will join, will come to the JCC, because they will feel safe.
I would hope so. And by the way, if anybody is ever saying, how could you show this kind of film, I of course ask them, have you seen the film? And that's how they get free tickets to the movie, because I will make sure that anybody who's complaining at least tries to engage, and their voice can be heard. And of course, if they are willing to speak nicely and not interrupt and let others speak as well, then they could be a part of the conversation. We always follow things with conversation, so it's actually responsible. And I think that's part of how we create an atmosphere that that drives a lot of people in to feel comfortable. We're I think a little bit more of a progressive organization, and a younger and newer organization. And our understanding of Israel, I like to think, and it's not always perfect, but our understanding of Israel is the modern Israel, is the new thought of Israel, and not that perfect Israel that some people need to see.
But lately you are in trouble, because if when you look at Israel today, it's a problem, it's a mess, it's so divided, it's so, I have to say it. I mean, who thought that we'll have a prime minister, who is, going on a trial for corruption? Also, the division in Israel. I mean, who you are embracing? It's so divided, and so it was not like this ever so much. It was a little bit a begging time, I think. But
well, I could tell you cinematically, which is interesting. It's like I'm waiting. I'm always happy to show something. They say, why don't you have a more balanced program at the JCC? There's no such thing as balance, first of all. But really, the first and foremost, most important thing to me is high quality films. And you want to show good movies. And unfortunately, there aren't enough good movies about all sides. I happened to come across recently a film about Yitzhak Shamir.
I heard about it.
He's like one of the forgotten kind of prime ministers. He's not Begin, he's not Netanyahu, he's in between, but yet was a prime minister for a significant amount of time.
Very influential, by the way.
Very influential, and a very interesting character.
Yes.
He is not, and he's kind of underexplored. He also didn't have the charisma of either of them. So he's not always like, the guy that you quote or remember. But I found this documentary about him, and we're hoping to premiere it. And I'm going to show it for Yom Ha'atzmaut because I think it's a great way to show the history of Israel.
That's a bold decision in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah, it'll be critical. But listen, I think Yom Ha'atzmaut is also a day where we can kind of put down our differences about Israel and take a moment to just celebrate Israel. And in which case, hopefully, other people will, people from the left might be able to embrace Shamir and learn about this. And I think he is part of what made Israel into such a complicated place.
Right. Yes, but the more you show films like that, the more you really deal with the complexity. Every society, have layers and complexity, but of course Israel too. But the more you deal with it and you show this kind of films, I think the more we will be able to dive and understand why things happens. And we don't have to use judging Israel coming from a preconceived negative idea. Do you know what I mean? I wish we could look at what happened, but still our loyalty and our commitment will not be spoiled. We will be much more effective coming from this good place of caring about the well-being of this country.
I think it's very important to bring films that Israel is making on its own people to the United States and to New York, and not to look at us, from the outside, just look at us from within. It's a very different point of view, and there's so many differences in the way that we look at each side, and many people don't have a clue. And it gives you something to think about, just to open your mind a little bit. So I think it's a very interesting choice, and to celebrate the Independence Day and reflect about very important years with one of the major character that went through the history of Israel.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you deal with Norman? The film Norman you showed at JCC, and it's about an Israeli fixer.
Yeah.
With what his name?
Richard Gere.
Richard, the gorgeous Richard Gere, and Leo Ashkenazi, who is even more gorgeous for us, I guess so.
Yeah.
But it was like about the Israel. So we deal here. I mean, we'll get to the other stereotypes. So this is like a small stereotypes, of Jewish people, for Jew, not Jewish, but Jew. How did you deal with it?
So it's interesting. I was just thinking about this movie recently because it really stayed with me. I think Joseph Cedar, who directed it, I think did a really good job in kind of getting into a little bit of American Jewry and the politics that exists there, and the specific characters. And it's really, that movie's given me a huge complex. Like anytime I say that I know somebody or am going to try to help somebody, I'm like, oh my God, am I being a Norman? And am I like that? And it's like, are you supposed to like him, dislike him? And the fact that it's that sophisticated and that complex, I give credit that, you have this character that is so defined and yet so complicated that you don't know what to do with. It might be a little bit of a negative sense. The really interesting thing to me is there's this whole movement now about authentic casting in the world. Mm-hmm. And for some reason—
What do you mean by authentic casting?
Authentic casting meaning that only a Black person should play a Black person, only an Indian person should play an Indian person.
But it doesn't work for disability.
And only a person with a disability should play. I run a disability film festival, so I know this very well. And there's a movement to say only a disability person should play a disability person, and give those opportunities and bring that authenticity to the story. Right. Of course, there's never been throughout cinematic history, non-Jews have played Jews and nobody has ever complained.
Yes.
So when Richard Gere is playing a Jewish man, he's playing him, I think, a little bit over the top Jewish.
But you know why? Yeah. Because if you
we're like, oh, Richard Gere.
Yeah, but if you want to deal, let's say, with disability, I hate to say it and I can be crucified, but anyway, it might be more effective if Daniel Day-Lewis will play it in terms of the way people perceive it. And I just, it's a big question.
But it's not from within. First of all, it limits the opportunities for people with disabilities specifically. Yeah. And there's hardly any actors. I mean, Marlee Matlin, there's hardly any actors who really get roles for people with disabilities. But also, I mean, I think it lacks a certain element of truth when you do that. And when that happens, you get, Dustin Hoffman, one of the greatest actors of our time. Right. I mean, is that what autism is? I think Rain Man actually did damage to the whole world of people with autism.
Yes.
So
Really?
it's
Wait.
yeah. I mean, listen. He's an excellent actor, but it lacked a level of nuance and understanding of autism that now anytime you meet somebody with autism, you think that they could count cards and have a very certain.
Not only that, you focus on his level of acting and imitating instead of the problem
Yeah,
itself.
but not the regular person. I think the regular person, if he does this, the film is bad.
I mean,
it doesn't put you into the moment, into the situation, and you identify and empathy and take the journey with Dustin Hoffman, then the film is a bad film.
Yeah, no, I think Rain Man is definitely limited. My Left Foot happens to be one that I feel like, Daniel Day-Lewis is such a method actor that really, if anybody can do it, it's him. But I think even that, I am sure that film was problematic for people with, I think it was cerebral palsy.
But even the new Israeli film, Asya.
There's another one.
Yes.
There's another one by Nir Bergman that just came out.
Right. Yes.
Has a child with autism.
Beautiful film.
Yeah, beautiful film.
Beautiful film.
Right. Lacks the authenticity. I think Israel, first of all, as far as political correctness, Israel's always a few steps behind. So they don't really think about that with casting. But I wanted to say about something really important before. Tzili, you mentioned the showing normal Israel. I think the success of Israeli cinema today are the films that are not about politics at all, that are not about the left, right, the classic things. I think when they're not about Holocaust soldiers, religion, I think when you just show the day-to-day life, those are absolutely my favorite. There's a movie.
There is another side to it. Come on, those films very hard to get finance.
But they're hard, right? They don't
even for the Holocaust film, very hard to get finance in Israel from the funds.
Yeah,
nobody wants to hear about that.
But with that, the amount of films that are made in Israel now and the quality of films that are made in Israel now, it's beyond, it got so much better.
Also television series. You showed Shua.
Yep.
You showed, Arabic work. What was it?
No, Saad Kashua.
Saad Kashua, the writer, Arab labor. Yeah.
But you showed in JCC, he's serious?
Yeah, no, the TV,
the
TV has come such a long way. I was just teaching a class on this, and I was going back to the beginnings of the success of Israeli television. I don't know, in the 90s when TV first opened up in Israel and like Channel 2 started, and up until then there was one channel. There was I had in my head. I woke up the other morning with the song Dobi Dobi Doberman. Remember that? It was about a dog who helped kids learn traffic.
Right.
Yeah, and it is a horrible show. It's about this Doberman dog who teaches children how to barks every time that a kid doesn't cross the street correctly. It was really lack sophistication. And then in the 90s, when the second channel came out, and suddenly there was and this changed Israel, I think, dramatically, because it was first time there was a commercial channel and it turned Israel into a commercial culture.
Opened up everything, sure.
It opened up everything. So the first two shows that came out in Israel that I remember, one was called Florentine by Fox.
Yes.
Beautiful show.
Right.
Took all these normal nuanced details of Israel. If you remember the opening sequence there, one of the characters it's first of all like beautifully shot and artistically just like it was so edgy, like even today I think most TV hasn't caught up with it.
Right.
Taking a choco biscuit, a chocolate milk in a bag, and she's spraying it beautifully, and it's creating this kind of rainbow, and this is taking Israeli culture. I mean, the chocolate milk in a bag, that's something that's 100% Israeli.
Everything
only exists in Israel, and to make it into something artistic and beautiful and captures kind of the tone of everything. I thought that this was like really one of those beautiful moments. The other show that I was suddenly thinking of was a show called Bat Yam, New York.
Yeah, sure.
Madmoni and
Madmoni and what is his name? Ofik.
Yes, David Ofik.
He's amazing.
And this is that show also was ahead of its time. It was beautiful writing, beautiful storytelling, and it's about a family where it's a traditional it's exactly about that turning point that I think Israel hit. That it's about a traditional Iraqi, I think, family
Yes.
who lives in Bat Yam, where the kids moved to New York.
Yes.
And it's that change. Israel was a traditional place. Israel was this place that had, and I think, very strong family values, very strong kind of, I'll say, even socialist values at times.
Yes.
And then New York comes in and suddenly becomes a commercial country, starts thriving on that.
Right.
And the new generation takes it in a very different direction.
Yes.
But this is exactly the journey that I was talking about, because you have a parallel journey of the development of Israel, that Israel had only one channel, and then the second channel, it was a revolution. And basically the first channel was organized by the union. So you were very limited and very blocked. You couldn't do many things. But the society grew, the demands grew, Israel grew up and decided to take advantage of the new things that came along. At the same time, the Jewish people in the United States had to change their attitude towards Israel. So through the films, you can really see the development of two societies that were supposedly be connected, but they're not really connected always. And the change happened fast, very fast and very dramatic. And you know, for people who don't know the JCC in New York, it is a balanced place in a sense that it's a very big Jewish community center. They can have a show of old poster of the beginning of Israel, graphic, the graphics from the beginning of Israel in the lobby. And they have a Bet Midrash where they study Torah. And they have your thing, your festival that totally takes everybody. So you can really cover a very large community from many angles. And that's the main balance. That's the main balance that you have. And inside your little pocket, you really make a little revolution.
There's something for everyone, and just like, so we have the other Israel Film Festival, so we also have the Israel Film Center Festival, which I mean, we have two Israeli film festivals where that one is the mainstream, and then anybody who doesn't feel uncomfortable with one can come to the other. They might not feel comfortable with everything that Israel has to put out in the mainstream, but it definitely gives alternatives.
Yeah, but tell me something. I worried a little, not worried. I wonder. Okay, so here you have the JCC, and in what way you are bothered by the anti-Semitism, one, how much you are involved in trying to do something, but the most really thing which bothers me, do you ever ask, like what I ask, how come, and the image of the Jew didn't change? It's still this stereotype of Madoff. And then of now, Epstein and what is his name, the Miramax guy, Weinstein.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Every time we don't even can do it, control damage or damage control. Sorry, I mean, we cannot uproot the way people look at Jewish people.
But I honestly don't think it's because of these people. Antisemitism.
No, it's much before.
But anti-Semitism is there always.
How can we change it?
When from time to time you have a person like this, it feeds it, and they say, "Oh, you see, this is just an okay."
Now the Crownites who don't really put a damn about the coronavirus. But what can, in such a fantastic that you just described, institute like JCC, even form a think tank, how you call it, a group of thinkers that will try to see how can we change this stereotype, which Norman, by the way, he's a manipulative guy, fixer,
Yeah, he fits into he's definitely not a positive
character. What can be done? Because you see you're so much in it, in terms of being in the center of all those different thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Harvey Weinstein's definitely not helping us as far as an Epstein, as far as anti-Semitism goes. But I don't think that's where the core of anti-Semitism is. The core of anti-Semitism is, and unfortunately, it's really comes from this extremist position, and I unfortunately have been a victim of it personally. You know, we show also Holocaust films, and you get Holocaust deniers who then, you know, look to attack you and troll you.
You had it personally felt?
Personally, they posted a picture of me with a
Yeah.
star, on me as the guy who's showing these films about the Holocaust. Of course, it's really Holocaust deniers to me. It's the strangest thing because. And Borat kind of points this out a little bit. If you're if you're anti-Semitic, don't you think that the Holocaust was a good thing? Why would you claim that the camps didn't exist? They should think that, you know, the camps were their proudest moment. But for some reason, they both deny the camps and want to get rid of the Jews at the same time.
No,
so
that's because you are so much deal with storytelling, you know. So there must be a way that we can reframe, we change the narrative. How can we change the narrative?
So I mean, I think the narrative is completely changing. I'm going to say something controversial now, and I'll say that, you know, if you look at American Jewry, most American Jews are there's mixed marriages.
Yes.
And that means that Jews are everywhere. And what does it mean to be Jewish anymore? It doesn't mean the same thing. It doesn't mean that this guy's a Jew. It means that you know, I'm bringing up my child, both, you know, I know so many families that they celebrate both Hanukkah and Christmas.
But, you know, I remember the days when people said, are we Jewish? Are we not Jewish? Are you Jewish? And they would say Hitler would have decided for you anyway.
Oh, right. I didn't hear that. Thank you.
Tzili,
you just opened my eyes to something.
Hitler would have decided for you, and then you won't have any problem. We don't have Hitler today, but I think that anti-Semitism we always had, and I think that there was assumption that the United States is clean from anti-Semitism, and it's not true. It was always there, just we don't always want to see it. But when you educate when you curate films for a festival, basically you talk to the Jewish audience. It's not that you bring the non-Jews or other communities.
I'm sure
and you tell them, you know, there's another angle that we would like to show you, or let's discuss it, or let's have a discussion, not just standing outside in Raleigh. Can you reach these communities? Can you develop these conversations?
So it's growing in two ways. The first way is both Israeli cinema has reached beyond just the Jewish community. Here in America, it's slowly, in Europe more so. In America, that's something that's changing, and I love it. I love it when I see a woman who is there because she's there because she heard there's great film from Israel, in the same way she would go to great Korean cinema. She's coming to see great Israeli cinema, and that suddenly, especially if it's the non-political stuff, if it's these real stories, then you get to really, really experience beyond these stereotypes. The other element is, take, for example, yes, we have within the films that we show, we don't just show Jewish films and Israeli films. We have our disability films. We have a social justice film festival, and those films are pretty progressive. And I think the fact that the JCC is showing those films, and believe me, we get complaints from the Jewish community saying, why is the JCC showing films about social justice and about you know, the Black community? And that's exactly why, because
exactly what makes you, you know,
because that's the problem. That is the problem there. And I think a lot of people from the outside community, not community, come to these festivals, and we try to promote them. And they say, oh, do I have to be Jewish to show up at the JCC? And of course not. You don't have to be Jewish. And you know, to see an audience at one of our events that had huge representation from the Black community, who have a very complicated relationship with the Jewish community now. It's
I know.
not as perfect as it used to be. And the 60s are long gone. MLK is long gone. And the Jewish community is not doing enough to bridge these gaps right now. And in fact, the Jewish community is part of the problem.
Yes.
And
there used to be such
a festival like this.
There was such a unit. There was such a used to be such a unity between the Jewish community and the African American. Yeah, but it's not as much now.
Isaac, how do you explain the fact that Tel Aviv on Fire was a big success here and didn't make any noise in Israel at all?
My friends, Sami Zoabi will be upset what you say.
But it's
true. Fellow NYU professor. It's funny. I think, first of all, I also haven't heard, like, the Palestinian community was very quiet about that film. I think they were like, what are you doing here? Why are you making a comedy about checkpoints, about the occupation?
It was a satirical movie, and it was excellent, excellent.
Yeah, I think comedy doesn't always translate, and I think the comedy worked better for Americans than it did for Israelis. I think also that there's a very different perspective. I luckily live in both worlds. I live, as probably you do as well. You live in Israel and America, and I could see what American Jewry is. I could speak in Hebrew with an accent. I get it. And I think there's two different languages.
Yeah,
so,
right. But you know,
that
maybe because in Israel, because it's a wonderful film. It's a smart, funny, humanistic, really wonderful. But I think maybe for some people, I don't want to make it as a group. It's hard to jump outside and look at a film like this and be able to really, wait a minute, let me just look at it and see where I fit into it. They have a difficulty to do it.
One of the great qualities of the film that he really crossed the line, because of course I took one of my boys to see that, and I wanted to see if he would get the little things and if he would laugh, and he was hysterical. And as much as I understood more, because it's all the nuances and the culture and the language, he got it enough to really understand the whole point and to laugh all the time and take it seriously. And which means that the movie really, really, really worked well. And I couldn't believe that in Israel they didn't enjoy it.
I wonder if it has also, we know that how you frame a picture, how you present it to the audience, it's sometimes really critical. By the way, I just want to mention I was in your festival, in my last feature. I really felt from the questions of the audience in the Q&A section, or in general, I followed all the Q&A, all the films, in the festival, and I felt that the audience are open to new ideas, are open to reevaluate even what they think about the phenomena. That was really interesting conversations. That
I'd like to say your conversation was one of the most popular, and I'm not just saying that.
Oh.
And I think that's what we love about it. It's a conversation festival. We've been working on it for years in many, many subtle ways. Of course, being virtual, it's not exactly the same, but we really want to create a space for true conversation, and that's something that's really important.
Yeah. By the way, that's one thing, to go back to what I don't know why I'm obsessed with that. Are you afraid of what will happen in general to the Jews around the world?
I hope I'm not in denial, but no. I think the Jewish community is a very strong community now. I think when something bad happens, and there are crazies who do bad things, I think the world is quick to respond, not like 70 years ago. So I think we are in a different place, and I think there's definitely a lot of hope for this. And I think it has to be clear to the world that yes, that these crazies exist, and they should not be given platforms, and we shouldn't fuel their fire at all.
I'm more worried about what's going on in Israel, and I'm worried about what will happen in the world, period. And the Jews are part of it. But we need to have a good Israel in order to have a good home for the Jewish community. But it's tricky times. It's very, times are not good now. And I think, and we'll have to see.
But tell me something.
Israel's become the dividing point often for American Jewry. A lot of people can't join certain organizations, like Black Lives Matter, for instance, like a progressive Jew who wants to support Black Lives Matter. That means that you're anti-Israel.
Why? That's what I say about reframing. How you frame it. I mean, so you know what? So can I send you a message?
And
I would like JCC to be the leader. To give the tone. And it's the second time I'm saying it in this meeting, in our conversation, to somehow sit down, the JCC, and think about how be a leader in, for example, it's okay to join the African American struggle with the Floyd and it's okay. It's okay to join, and even we have to. In things that happen which is not just, not against inequality. Sorry. I mean, JCC can be actually the leader.
So I've been there for over 15 years, and I could say that the JCC has been really brave on many points. Most Jewish community centers will not have an Other Israel Film Festival, will not have a social justice film festival. Right. And they've really not shied away from what I think.
Can you influence them?
And I think we are. First of all, I love it that
I think the programs of the JCC are influencing because it's growing and growing. And even at the Corona time, you thought that it will shut down everything, and everything was thriving, right?
More than ever. Other Israel this year, we quadrupled our numbers.
Yeah.
So I think, and we're reaching further than ever before.
What's going on outside of New York?
What's going on outside New York? In what way?
What's going on outside of New York in the Jewish world and cinema world?
Except the
JCC outside of New York.
Yeah,
so I hope
worshiping.
I hope you're experiencing this, that people are taking, there's one thing that's thriving are film festivals, because we could do this virtually. And in general, even before that, in the Jewish community, every JCC now has their film festival. Right. It's become, in the 70s, they all had little theater projects. Yeah. And now it's turned into film programs.
And their choices are different.
They're
daring more.
A little bit. And right, at first, nobody would show any films that came out of Other Israel. Other Israel was a completely individualized film festival. Today, now 13, 14 years later, I'm seeing more and more of other festivals taking films from Other Israel. Yeah. And I think that means things are spreading. It used to be just New York and San Francisco. They would have.
So what is the correlation between New York and, of course, outside New York, the way they choose film and the audience? Because you said this is really, you could see this year more young people, but outside New York, I wonder how much those Jewish communities have young people, and then they have to find films which will appeal to the older generation.
So I started a program once that would take some Israeli films that were completely non-political, bring them into, is actually some of my favorite films, Noodle and Aviva, yes. My Love, if you've seen these, bring them into universities in a partnership between the local film festivals, so like the film festival in Pittsburgh, the Jewish Film Festival in Pittsburgh, and the university there, to have them work together. So then the students will be part of the festival in many ways, and hopefully open the door. Because I'll tell you, you're right. In most other cities, if you look at who's going to Jewish film festivals, it's people of a certain age, yes. and it's not really as diverse as we see it here in New York.
So I wonder, because it's connected and not connected, but I wonder. Like you have a place like in New York, it's called the Benediction.
Yep.
It's a synagogue.
It's a synagogue, but they changed the whole tone of worshiping. There is music, and
it's a very big reform community on the Upper West Side, and they bring music, and they bring young people, and they bring Rabbi women and Cantor's women.
Yeah. They're by the way, people felt that they weren't progressive enough.
And now there's started at 300, and there are now thousands.
There are thousands.
3,000, 4,000.
But now, there's been like Romamu is another synagogue that also is growing so quickly.
How they did it? They got a lot of young people, young families.
First of all, you got to be progressive. You got to meet people where they are. And not try to force them into something, and offer something new. And by the way, if you want to know what is a JCC, we're not a synagogue. I feel, and that's possibly one of the things that makes Israel.
So you don't have a shul, you don't have a small synagogue?
We're not allowed to do any kind of services. We're not allowed to do any.
But you do have Bet Midrash.
We have a Bet Midrash. You could study.
You think people know what it is? Most people don't know.
They study Judaism.
Right, but we're not a religious organization, and we don't do any kind of official formal practicing, and we're more about the culture, and it's for those people. And actually, that's somebody like me. I don't feel comfortable in a synagogue. I only feel comfortable in a cultural environment. And that's where I find my
You
journey.
always stepped into, one of the things which I kept thinking, because I might identify myself so much as Israeli, like 99%.
But you're very Jewish.
But I'm still identified, and I'm so. I know that I'm 6 months here, but it's like I'm there. I'm not here. So I never got involved with the Jewish community here, and I think maybe if people like us who are really would like a change, maybe we should join.
I mean, they try that. I think there's such a difference between, and this is one of the things that Norman points out. Norman is the ultimate American Jew. He's involved with his synagogue. He wants to be on this chair on the bima, and they probably call it a shul there. Like, what Israeli has ever heard the word shul? It's
shul it's the Yiddish nickname for synagogue.
Right, but
Ashkenazi, yeah.
But that's exactly Israeli culture. This is something, I mean, in Israeli culture, the Yiddish culture hardly exists there in a strong way. It was in fact kind of minimized at the beginning. There's little resurgence, a Yiddish theater here, some things there, but it's not like Israeli food is not. It's really hard to find a good blintz in Israel. To find a knish doesn't exist. And these are here in New York. That's Jewish food. A Jewish deli, that doesn't happen in Israel.
But I find that the good thing is that Judaism is kicking, because you have so many groups and so many age groups that are insisting of being part of whatever they call Jewish, their way, and it's kicking and it's growing and it's changing and it's fine as long as it exists. So I find it very healthy and very interesting, and I don't think we have to have unity. I think we have to think, and I think we need to experience, and I think we need to visit different ways of Judaism. I think it's a healthy process.
It's a healthy process, but I wonder if Israelis and Jews one day will become two different things, and two very different religions and two different tribes.
I'm worried about it. I personally, although I kept saying I identify myself as an Israeli, people, but Jewish, I'm of course, that's for granted, but I identify myself. I hope that will not happen. So if you have the feeling that it might happen, we better hurry up and try to, again, what can we do? Because you were successful in this meeting with us to open up the fan. What is the JCC? It's a complete fan. You just open it, for me at least, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm more convinced that JCC can take upon himself more tasks.
But even the JCC has a different meaning to each one. And for every person, it means something else. And the good thing is that the JCC allows many things to take place, and you can find yourself the way you want. Yeah. And I think it's a normal process. I think it's much better. And I think this is very Jewish to think all the time, to develop your way all the time, not to follow one way and you have to. And
it's both Jewish and Israeli.
That's right.
Yeah, but we do have to recharge our batteries, and we have to rechannel, our energy to look ahead 50 years from now and how we would like to be there.
So here's one interesting program that the JCC is now running. We have a Center for Israel, and within that, we're also trying to engage Israelis. And then suddenly we realize the same way there are birthright trips to Israel.
Yes.
There is such a divide between the Israelis who come here and don't understand what the Jewish community is, that
don't care.
This program is trying to train it better. It's trying to both bring in Israeli groups to give them a better understanding of what the Jewish community is. Also for Israelis that are moving here, to let them understand and have better resources. And I think that's a fabulous program. That's one of the ways that we're going to bridge that.
Well, this is a great idea. I've never heard of. Wonderful.
Yeah,
it's not so difficult.
I sometimes, because I'm one of the token Israelis at the JCC, that when Israeli groups come in to visit, and sometimes there'll be educators, and I meet with them, you really see how different Israelis are, and how it's amazing how in 70 whatever years, there's such a specific kind of culture that has nothing to do with American Jewish culture.
Right.
To try to bridge that gap. And some of it, some of it comes with a lot of it, I think, has to do with religious practice and the fact that here there's such freedom with that, and in Israel, that's definitely something that's lacking.
It's not modernized. It's like, you know, it's really keep people away because it's stuck. You know, the whole way of worshiping. Listen, Tzili, we have to let him go, but this is not the point. The point
one
is,
more thing. What's your Israeli favorite film?
Oh, come on, don't do it. Don't do it.
I knew I was going to be asked.
Come on, don't do this.
I mentioned before, I mean, I love the band's visit, but I mentioned before, I like kind of smaller films.
No, you already said.
And Aviva, My Love. Have you ever seen Aviva, My Love?
Yeah. Oh, Shemi Zalchin is wonderful.
It is, I mean, it takes place in Tiberias. It takes, you know, Tiberias. Who's ever made a movie about Tiberias? And it takes place in real Tiberias.
Yes.
Not just, I mean, the hotels are in the back.
Very devoted to this kind of stories.
The real Tveria of those days, because it's changing now.
It's changing now, yes. But
it became a Haredic city.
It's Shas.
It's
Shas. No, this was
Shas, but it's Haredic, and it took away the spirit of the Tveria. Really different city.
It's a family drama. It's written beautifully. It has a beginning, middle, and end.
Yes.
It's a story.
Yeah.
It's everything. I feel it's everything about Israel too. And there was one moment there that I love to give as an example of how we can take both sides of criticizing Israel and yet also loving Israel. And there's a moment where Aviva, the mother, is having a fight with her son, and her son is having a breakdown. He's furious at her, and because first of all, this is something that's so Israeli, that the way she grabs him, she's a Mizrahi mother. She's very touchy. She's very hands-on. She hugs him and wrestles him to the ground. And as he's fighting with her, she's both hugging him and fighting with him. And it is that's something that could exist. She loves him and she's fighting with him. And I think that's really
learn something from this movie, because you know, me and Tzili, we say it almost all the time. We are from Dizengoff, Square Dizengoff, right?
But
and we are Ashkenazi. And I must tell you, I didn't meet a Sephardic Israeli until I was in the army. But it's such a good movie that after maybe 10 minutes watching the film, I was in it. I was like there with this mother in Tiberias, Tveria, Square Dizengoff. I mean, oh, come on. So that's what made it a great movie. But also, I wish it will happen also between Israelis and American Jewry. That we will be able to completely, contain each other and benefit from each other, not just money. Because, it used to be, show me the money, but it's not anymore.
Right now it even that's so funny. You get these old school Israelis who sometimes come to America and they're like Golda, and they're like, be the rich American uncle.
But Israel never
are the rich
succeeded to solve it. Israel never changed its way, and there's like an infection that nobody wants to treat. And instead of re-educate and re-evaluate and and own your own country and your own feeling and be independent in a big way, they keep going and going, like in the 30s, in the 20s, in the 40s, and we're not there.
No, we are not.
But
and
mentally, many people are there, and it's so wrong. It's so
we have enough people who are rich and can contribute in Israel and be philanthropic in Israel.
But they do.
But now it's starting to be. Listen, I know that I sat here, like whatever, and I coming to the JCC, and I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm asking you. There are so many things that JCC from our conversation can lead. Even the new idea of absorbing Israelis who come here and do this kind of networking with American Jews. Well, anyway, I really,
This is the time. This is the time to do it. The JCC is such a fertile place. And is especially now, I think, even with the pandemic, I think there's all these opportunities to start things and to get things going. And the JCC is young enough. We're not 90 years old that have, or over 100 years old.
You say the JCC is a fertile place, and I think about the lobby with the 5 zillion little kids. To the building.
You enter, and on the right side, there is all those little.
You will be trained in 5 minutes when you walk in the door. No, but honestly, any seed we plant, trees grow. I started a disability film festival. It's now a national program in 20 cities across the US. You start an Israel Film Center, you get hundreds of thousands of people attending these Israeli films. There's so much that could be done.
What can we say? It was a pleasure. It was a
Amazing.
pleasure,
Yep.
right? Listen,
Yep.
it
We
was a
learned a
pleasure. I'm
lot.
going to say it again.
Thank you. I want to do it more.
Yes.
Okay, we will.
You can come back. I mean, you know, after it no,
After
we'll
all,
see.
we're
We'll
neighbors.
see. Yeah, we are neighbors. I'm not. Oh, come on. Only 6 months. So we will let you go. It was really a pleasure. We'll be here next week, Tzuzamen, with a different, wonderful guest,
Yep.
right? So everybody stay safe.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Isaac.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you.
great.